Like, amazing.
Yeah, he's a great guy, Jimmy. I've known Jimmy since probably I was about 17.
Oh, brilliant.
I went to
gentlemen, we're
college
live
with
on
him.
the tube.
He was a good lad.
Do you want me to start recording?
Yeah, not yet.
We'll do a counting. Are we on Are we live on the tube?
We are live on the tube.
Nice.
Okay, Tricky, how you doing? Are you set up? You ready to rock and roll?
Am I doing the intro?
Tricky's microphone's died again. Yeah, we can't hear you, mate.
Right. Can we hear you?
Is he back?
That's happened before.
It has.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just when I load Logic up, I think it just like boots the audio driver for the web browser or something for some reason. But
okay.
Switch it on and off again, and it works. So
Gary Hughes is in the house. Evening, Gary.
Sweet. There he is, Luke Stevens.
Luke's bound to be in there. He's on it like Sonic. He is.
Gentlemen. Am I doing the intro?
Are we ready? 3, 2, 1, click.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of the Hop Edition. We're on episode 38. Looking blankly at my co-hosts.
Possibly.
And this is
something like that.
Something like that. 30. Yeah, we'll go with 38. Why not? 38 is great. And this is a special edition because we have an extra special guest with us, Mr. Matthew Curtis.
Hello.
Who is author of Modern British Beer, who's very kindly come along to join us this evening. Hi, Matt.
How you doing, Owen? You all right?
I'm very good. How are you guys? The normal guys that are on the podcast.
Usual, slightly hungover.
So the usual then, Andy.
Yeah, usual.
Standard Saturday.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Standard practice.
So I think we're calling this podcast, unsurprisingly, Modern British Beer with Matthew Curtis. And I'm going to hand over to Matt just to briefly introduce himself and talk a little bit about his book.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me on the show. First, before I introduce myself, I want to do a public apology because I was meant to be on this show in December, but I went off the rails. I was up for some awards and I thought I might win a couple of them, and I didn't take it very well. And I went out the house when I was meant to be recording with you and went to a pub to have a pint, and I turned my phone off. And then at about 8:30, 9 o'clock, I realized I was not anywhere near my computer and had no way of getting on the podcast. So I want to say sorry for that. And thank you for having me on the show. My name is Matthew Curtis. I am a beer writer, photographer, and podcaster. I've been doing that as a full-time job for about the last 6 years. But I've been writing about beer. January the 4th was my 10-year anniversary of my first ever blog post on my original blog, Total Ales, which is where it all started for me as a hobby that got out of hand, really. I started getting some paid commissions for magazines like Ferment, which I've been writing for 7 years. I worked for a website called Good Beer Hunting in the States, and built up enough freelance work to just about make it a living, and it is brilliant. I get to do my favorite thing in the world and go to breweries and pubs and enjoy lots of beer. So I also run a magazine with my friend Johnny Hamilton. He's a brewer at an amazing brewery in Edinburgh called New Barns. And our magazine is called Pellicle, and it's been going since 2019. And we have a podcast as well that's kind of like my own little project where I just talk about beer. And last year, I had my first 2 books published. I had a little guide book called An Opinionated Guide to London Pubs come out right at the start of the year. But in August, I had a book published by Camera called Modern British Beer, which is my biggest project to date. And it's essentially a summary of my experience as a beer drinker and a beer writer over the last 10 years, and how I have observed the changes in British beer, and why I think British beer has changed forever, and why I think that's really good, and why I think it's important. So that's a book that came out on the 12th of August, and it's about to get a reprint. So thank you to everyone who's bought a copy, and for all the wonderful feedback. I'm really proud of it as a body of work. I think it's entertaining as well as informative about where beer is at in the UK. And the next plans for me is to keep writing about beer on Pellicle and for other magazines. And fingers crossed, I'll be starting work on another book pretty soon. Can
you give us a little sneak peek?
I've not signed the contract yet, so I don't want to it's been agreed in principle, but the ink has not been put on the paper yet. But it's hopefully another project for Camera. Nice. And who are really happy with how Modern British Beer did, which is really encouraging for a company, and well, not a company, an organization like Camera, which is invested in a lot of preserving Britain's real ale heritage, to work with a writer like me who is really into what's happening now in terms of breweries as well as the traditional stuff. It's really reassuring to be given that faith, and Modern British Beer, they just let me run with it. They, as much as there is some great cask beer in it that I love, there's also pastry stouts, New England IPAs, lager. That's all part of British Beer. So it's really great to work with them. They've been remarkably open-minded and given me a lot of rope to produce work for them.
I know you can't see the YouTube chat at the moment, Matt, but one of our regular listeners, Jesper, has said, "Is the book out on Audible yet?"
So it is not. There is not an audiobook for it. That is not something that has been agreed on. Camera is still a small organization with a small budget. It's something that's been talked about, but you know what? On that comment, I'll get back in touch with them and see if I can convince them to do it, because I think an audiobook would be really good.
I mean, he's very, very Scandinavian. I can't remember if he's Danish or Norwegian or Swedish. He's one of those. But his English is better than mine, so I'm not entirely sure why he needs the audiobook. But Jesper's a top lad, so thank you for that. I'm sure he'll be very appreciative.
Brilliant.
Thanks for that, Matt. Thanks for that. Quick rundown of your bio and about your book. So interesting about Camera. You're talking about. Do you think there's kind of a shifting in mindset of Camera in terms of more of an acceptance of modern beer styles?
I think so. I think the important thing to remember about Camera is it's a consumer organization, and as well as having a head office, it's split into all these different branches that are kind of self-governed all around the UK. So if you join Camera, you are a part of the whole organization, but you also go to your local branch and you can do grassroots campaigning work to save pubs and promote beer in your area. Some of those groups are more progressive than others, and some of them aren't as open to keg beer and modern styles, whereas some of them have really embraced it. As an organization centrally, however, at head office, they are working really hard on everything from diversity through to embracing other beer styles. At the bigger festivals, you should start seeing keg as a completely normal thing. Definitely at Great British Beer Festival and the Central Manchester Camera Festival, which is probably maybe the second or third biggest festival they do. But they're heading in the right direction. But you have to also remember that if you're a member, you can contribute your opinion. It's that kind of group. So it's a broad church.
Yeah. Nice.
Cool.
Awesome. So should we slide into a bit of what we're drinking?
I think we should.
What are we drinking, guys?
Tricky
Matt,
was the last one through the door. Come on.
All right.
I'll start then, shall I?
What are you drinking?
Shall I? So I have got the Neon Raptor clone beer that I brewed and put a video out for just recently. So this is their Kit Bash Hazy Pale Ale, and that is from the kit that's available from Brew Day, who are a relatively new homebrew supplier out of Nottingham. So they've been teaming up with local breweries in Nottingham to put together these kit beers because Neon Raptor are Nottingham based as well. They are currently working on a new one from Bang the Elephant for one of their Goes beers, and there's a few others on their website as well. So yeah, keep an eye on them because they seem to be putting out some nice stuff. The beer itself has come out very nicely. I was a little bit scared because this one was the one that I made with the Voss yeast, which is apparently Neon Raptor's house yeast, and in their instructions for this kit, they said to dry hop at sort of full fermentation temperature for the first dry hop, so it's a double dry hop beer. So the first batch of dry hops went in at 36 degrees fermentation temperatures. I was a little bit scared that it was going to turn into a green grassy mess, but it actually came out all right in the end. So
super bitter as well.
Yeah, but yeah, it doesn't seem to have that. There was a big bunch of Chinook in there as well, Andy. So as we know, it was not necessarily our.
And you're it's not a pine monster.
Not any. It's nowhere near as piney as the as that
Fire.
other beer that we made. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit. There's a hint of that on there, so I think you can tell there's a bit of Chinook in there, but it's not, especially considering the amount. It hasn't had the negative impact that I feared it might when I was making it. So it's very nice, good kit, nice beer. Yeah, keep an eye on Brew Day for those new kits coming out.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Little plug for Brew Day.
Little plug, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, shilling like a good one.
Not trying to
Andy.
flag any more free kits at all.
Andy, what you got, mate?
I've got the homebrewer staple of the Vacant Gesture Blonde, which is a very simple Challenger and Mosaic Whirlpool and Mosaic dry hop. So yeah,
Is it so for Matt's benefit, it's a golden ale, effectively?
is it a blonde? He calls
Is
it,
it
I
blonde?
think.
He calls it a blonde ale. I'm not sure it actually fits
Because
the
Is it not because he casks? Well, he normally has it in casks. So, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Have
It's
you
like a golden ale.
have you experienced Harrison's Brewery yet, Matt?
I've not, no.
You need to go
There
to
you go.
Retford.
Retford. Well, I'm from Lincolnshire, so it's not, maybe on the way home to Lincoln to see my mum, I'll stop by.
Pop in, see Harry, tell him that the Hop Edition sent you, and he'll charge double for all your beer.
Is that safe?
So what's it called? It's called the Brew Shed, isn't it?
The Brew
Brew
Shed.
Shed,
yeah.
Brew Shed,
Brew
yeah.
Shed.
Ha-
So it's
Harry's-
a restaurant and
He's
you know,
quite
brew pub.
infamous. He's quite infamous with the homebrewing community because he actually shares a lot of documents about building a brewery and how he's done that and welding and we learn
Yeah.
all these skills.
He's kind of vlogged that whole journey from
Yeah.
doing what we're doing through to building and owning and running his whole brew pub restaurant and
He made his own canning
building
machine,
most of
didn't
the kit as well.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he built his own canning machine, which
Yeah, he
is
did,
quite
yeah.
an endeavour.
he?
Yeah.
He's a top lad. He's a really good bloke, is Harry.
He's a capable
If-
individual.
In
Yeah.
fact, he's been on the podcast, hasn't he? I don't know what.
Yeah, he
episode
has,
it was, 28 or something.
Yeah, he was on there.
Yeah.
Come on then, Matt. What are you drinking?
I'm not drinking homebrew. I prefer to drink the beer that people with actual talent make. So I've got a beer from a local brewery, Track, which is just down the road from me here in Manchester. Track make amazing IPAs, and this is an amazing IPA. But I'll hold the beer up so you can see it's crystal clear.
Ooh, nice.
That is a West Coast IPA. It's an 8% dipper actually, and it's a collab with Crosby Hops, which is a hop farm in Oregon that Track work with quite closely, and Bagby, which is a brewery in California, founded by Jeff Bagby, who is a bit of a legend in the California beer scene. He used to be the head brewer at a brewery called Pizza Port, which was sort of one of the legendary San Diego breweries that he kind of pioneered the West Coast IPA 20 years ago. This is single hop Centennial. It's 2021 Centennial, so it's
Nice.
like really fresh. And Centennial this year is really interesting because it's always quite a lemony hop, but this year it's got quite a strong sort of rose note. So it's got this sort of floral quality to it. It's really good. I mean, it's an 8% West Coast IPA. It's right in the center of my wheelhouse, so I'm very happy.
I'm surprised Tricky's desk ain't lifting up. I'll be honest with you, mate.
I'm a bit of a Track fan. In fact,
Holding it down.
I have actually got that beer in the fridge myself because I got that. I picked up that West Coast pack that they did, but I'm really looking forward to that because that sort of single hop Centennial West Coaster sounds great. And
So that's not totally dissimilar to what's that all Centennial?
Yeah, that's what I was
beer
thinking, Owen.
with the fish on it.
Two Hearted,
Two-Hearted.
Bells.
What I will say between this is definitely like a modern California because it's super pale, and Two Hearted is
Caramel.
really malty. Two Hearted is an amazing beer. I was in the US in November. My dad has lived out there for about 11 years, but Two Hearted was on tap everywhere, and I drank a lot of it. It is such a good beer.
It was like the first beer I ever did a full batch of all grain at home, and it was just
Brave move.
So good.
What is it? 7%, something like that in our ABV range.
Is it 6? No,
It's not quite 8 dipper level,
No.
but it's a big IPA.
It's about
it's a big
7, I
IPA.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I've only tried it once, and that was back in August, was it? At London Craft Beer Festival. They had cans of it there. But I'm not necessarily sure if it travels well, to be fair.
No beer travels well. Come on.
No, I think you've got to, like say, Matt, get over to the States and try it on tap somewhere reasonably local to the brewery.
Definitely.
Owen, what you got in your glass?
So I'm drinking my my elusive Level Up clone.
Is your cleared?
Not really. Not really.
Mine's is super hazy.
Mine's
It
still
puts me
not
off.
cleared either.
I wouldn't say mine's super hazy, but it's not cleared up any
It-
in the period of time that's been in the keg, to be honest.
It just doesn't look good in an amber ale, does it? If it's not,
No.
if it's not clear.
Yeah, I'd say mine's like
bit of a dishwater vibe.
there's not much left, but it's not super cloudy. So this was with Simcoe and Cashmere. So it's got like nice light burnt toffee vibes going on. Really well balanced beer. Yeah, I'm really pleased with it. And in fact, I don't think there's a great deal left in the keg.
But that was is it?
That's
Who's the
normally a good
brewery? Is
sign.
it Level Up?
So again,
Elusive.
Is it? Oh, it's Elusive. Sorry,
yeah, Elusive
and
Brewing.
it's the Level Up.
Matt, you're probably familiar with Elusive, aren't you?
I've actually known Andy Parker, the owner and head brewer there, since he was a home brewer. He's a bit of a legend. He's known as the nicest guy in beer, which is really true. But he makes incredible beer. Oregon Trail is one of my sort of most regularly purchased beers because it just hits the nail on the head for that American West Coast style. But it's like you said earlier, beer doesn't travel well, so being able to get that in the UK means it's a real favorite of mine.
Yeah, I've met him a couple of times and chatted to him, and I can confer that he is a lovely, lovely man. But we've actually been collectively brewing our way through his Camera Essential Homebrew book, and doing it collectively on Zoom every 6 weeks, which Tricky organises, which has been quite good fun.
Yeah.
He needs to
Especially
do
during
another book
lockdown.
though, doesn't he? Because we've kind of exhausted most of the recipes out of that.
We're gonna have a word.
So get on it, Mr.
Do we
Parker.
know any authors?
Yeah, if you speak to him, Matt.
Do we know any authors who could possibly write a book like this? I mean, if only we knew an author.
I tell you what, I love writing about beer, but I'm no as much as you put all the ingredients and the equipment in front of me, and I know how to make it work, and I could definitely get a beer out of the other end. But of the quality of that is not something I have great success in. So I don't do a lot of home. I don't do a lot of home brewing.
No, but you could just get the recipe off the brewers while you have the different breweries, you know.
I'm of the belief that people who brew excellent beer should be the ones writing the recipes. That's for sure. Maybe I could do like the foreword, but I'll leave the recipes to the people who are good at it.
Oh, that sounds like a plan, man.
Yeah, that's cool.
I guess it's just me then. So I made an IPL a while back. 5.4% has come out, which is bang on. And this is Pilsner and Carapils. That's all I put in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is Citra, Azaka, and Cashmere hops. And yeah, You guys need a bottle of this.
Yeah.
It's literally
Yes,
alcoholic. It's alcoholic on bongo. It's peach, it's pineapple, it's passion fruit. It's got like this weird orange thing going off. It might just be the COVID, but oh my god, this is one of the best beers I think I've tasted in quite a long time.
Mhm.
Did you not ferment it with us?
Nope, Lutra. I put Lutra through this one. I love it. I think it's brilliant. And to be fair, if I hadn't had COVID this week, I think the keg would have probably been
gone.
It would have been 10, maybe 15 pints lighter than it is right now.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. It's a banger of a beer. It really is nice. So there we go. That's what we're drinking. And I think it's time to move on to the next section, which is where we hand the microphone over to Matt and we say, Matt, tell us why you wrote a book all about modern British beer, and why is it that you put Roosters right up at the top of the list as one of the pioneers, given my boss lives 3/4 of a mile away from the Roosters brewery and says, well, I didn't think it was anything special.
Well, me and your boss would just have to agree to disagree. I'll get to that. That's a long question.
I will say she's a red wine fanatic and has very few taste buds left.
Okay, you know what? Maybe she should go and try the new Imperial Stouts aged in red wine barrels. That might change your mind. But first, I'll talk about the book. So I wrote the pitch for it in 2018. I had the idea while I was still living in London because three breweries that had got really popular were Beavertown, Camden Town, and Brewdog. And I started seeing them in all the off licenses. You know, you saw the kids who didn't go to pubs, who, 18 to 20-year-olds drinking cans of this beer. And I'm like, this beers that tasted like this. If you think about Beavertown Gamma Ray, I used to drink a lot of that sort of 2015, 2016, kind of led the hazy charge. One of a few breweries, but definitely changed habits. But that kind of peachy, tropical, hazy pale was becoming normalized. And it was evidence to me that this idea of craft beer, or modern beer, as I decided to call it for the book, because I think craft is a bit too argued over, and I wanted to distance it from that a bit. Hence why I used the word modern. But I thought it had changed forever. So I started thinking about British beer culture and my experiences as a drinker. So when I turned 18 in 2001, I remember being taken to my village local in Lincolnshire, the Bottle and Glass, and the options were literally Stella, Carling, or Foster's. And I'll admit I had a Foster's. That was my first legal pint in the pub. But that was the choice, and the cask in that pub was probably John Smith's cask, which back then it wasn't good, and you just wouldn't be seen dead drinking cask as an 18 to 21-year-old in the early 2000s. Certainly not among my friends. You wouldn't go in those kind of pubs. It just wasn't the done thing. And what I've seen is a shift in more people getting excited about beer of all ages. Tap rooms making it more transparent and accessible, and more recently, that love for traditional English styles has come back. You've got Daya brewing a bitter now, which is called Best Foot Forward, and it's a brilliant beer. And I had a pint on cask only this week, and if they can do a beer like that and a beer like Steady Rolling Man, it shows me that beer's in good hands, because you've got the new modern beer styles and a bit of honoring the tradition of British beer, which is important to preserve as far as I'm concerned. So I wanted to write a book that kind of talked about how that had happened and why it's important. And that was the pitch that I wrote in 2018. And I didn't send it to camera back then. I sent it to some bigger publishers, and it got knocked back 2 or 3 times. And then I went for a pint with a very well-known beer writer called Pete Brown. And I said, I've been trying to get this book off the ground. Like, can I have some advice? And he said, the best thing to do is sit on it, wait for the right opportunity. And maybe you're a bit ahead of the curve with it. Maybe it's just a case of finding the right publisher that's waiting for the budget. But I think it's a good idea, but you'll be surprised, sit on it for a year and see what happens. And at the start of 2020, before the pandemic, I was contacted by a chap called Alan Murphy, who is the commissioning editor at Camera Books. and he had been asked by CAMRA to bring in some new voices, some new authors for their books. So Johnny Garrett's another one, who did A Year in Beer as another example. But I had this pitch that I'd been refining, and I said, I met Alan in person in Liverpool in March 2020. I got very poorly after being in Liverpool in March 2020 for some reason, but that's by the by. But he did like my book pitch, and he sent, the next few months I got the contract through, and I'd signed up to do this book. And then it was a case of just trying to put it all together. And through that process, I came up with like how I was going to structure the book. So I wanted to write a narrative style book so that it's written so you can read it cover to cover and it should make sense. It should flow. But I broke it down into essays based on case studies of beers I think are really, really important. And breweries that have had impact and beers that are also really delicious. That's really important. So it's a less is more approach. That's the best way to describe it. And I feel like, but instead of, I could have done like one of these 300 beers to try books, but I wanted to give each beer the room it deserves. So Jaipur and Marble Pint, those beers have 1,000 words because like they've got stories and people to talk to about them. And I think that was really crucial. And it's also a chance to write about breweries like Little Earth Project and Double Barreled and Elusive and Unity that I think are making great beer and are part of this tapestry of modern British beer that maybe haven't been written about in books before, and all are examples of how beer has changed. And I don't want to ruin the end, but it kind of circles back to like how important British tradition is to all of that. We wouldn't have anything we have today if it wasn't for the greats, the classics, and a healthy respect for that. So that's modern British beer. It's part philosophy and then part sort of evidence case study on why I think beer has changed. But the other important thing is I've written it so it should be fun and enjoyable and like engaging, and you should want to reach for a beer while you're reading it. That's, I wanted to make you thirsty. That's the point of beer writing for me. Like it's celebrating the drink. And if you're going to read about beer and if you don't put that book down and go, I need to go and drink some beer, then I've failed in my job, I think.
Can I just jump in here a sec, Matt? I know you're mid diatribe, but you look like you need a drink. I sat in this shed, okay, and I actually had the book open on the desk, literally in front of me right here. And I got to the end of, I think you were talking about Elusive. And I just turned around and I went, I need a pint. And I went to the kegerator behind me. I pulled a beer, I put it down to the side of me, and I carried over. What's the brewery that comes after Elusive?
Oh.
He's getting the book. I can't
It might be Double Barreled.
Whichever one it was after that, I started reading, and you were talking about I think it was was it a brown ale or something you were talking about after that? And I'm like, well, shit, I don't have Aussie's brown ale on tap. It was almost like when you finished talking about a beer, my brain went, I need a pint of one of those.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Unity. Unity Collision is after Oregon Trail.
Whatever it was, I was like, well, shit, I don't have a beer like that on tap. Otherwise, I would have had a pint of that as well. It did its job, mate. It did its job.
Well,
that's excellent to
hear.
My
problem was I more often than not was reading your book on the bus on the way to work.
Yeah.
So, it's a sad state that I did sort of then think, I really like a beer right now.
I think that's
too successful.
No, the problem was on the way home. Owen kept missing his stop because he was hammered.
Yeah, I'd skipped work.
So to pick up on your point about Roosters, so something that was the initial plan was to only write about beer that came out after 2000. But in my research, I quickly learned that there are certain breweries that came along kind of before the boom of craft beer that if it wasn't for them, the boom would not have happened in the way it did. So Kelham Island in Sheffield is another example of this. But Roosters, when it was founded in 1993, its original founder, Sean Franklin, he was basically the first person in the UK to bring Cascade hops in, to bring that flavor into beers, and that was Roosters Yankee, which is the beer I write about. Because of what he did, people got to experience that grapefruit, that really intense flavor in a fresh beer, because beers like Anchor Liberty Ale and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale were being imported to the UK, but to have that in a British cask beer, and you know what? In 1993, a lot of people hated it. They just didn't understand why it was so bitter and floral, and a lot of people just went no. And now people will drink Roosters Yankee and say, well, it's not very hoppy. That's how palates have changed. That's why I wrote this book, because it's about that. But what I think Roosters are an outstanding brewery. It's now owned by a family called the Fozzards, and it's run by two brothers who are about our age, called Tom and Ollie. And Tom is the sales and marketing director, and Ollie is the head brewer. And they keep the tradition alive. They brew beers like Roosters Yankee on cask, and that's what in Yorkshire, that's what people drink, lots of cask beer, and that's that. You go to Harrogate, where they're based, and that beer is everywhere, and it's super fresh and amazing. But when they took the brewery over in 2011, the first beer Ollie brewed was called Baby-Faced Assassin, and it was a bit of a statement of intent. It was an all Citra West Coast IPA, and they brew a lot of modern styles of beer. They've just started a barrel program. I mentioned a wine barrel-aged Imperial Stout. They've got some bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Stout. If your friend's a wine drinker, she might really enjoy those beers. But what I'll say is, if you go to Harrogate, it's a great day out on the beer. There's so many good pubs and craft beer bars there, but you can go to the Roosters tap room, and honestly, it looks like an American tap room. It's big. It's got the trestle tables, loads of beers on tap. You can see the brewery through the plexiglass windows. It's got food trucks there. It's that proper US tap room experience, and the brothers have spent a long time in the US, so they've really nailed that experience. So absolutely, Roosters are a really modern brewery, and they, a bit overlooked sometimes because they do stick to their guns with the tradition as well. But I'm a big fan.
Have any of the other guys in the room had Baby-Faced Assassin?
No. To be fair,
I don't think
I'm going to show my ignorance. I'd never heard of Roosters before I read about it in Matt's book.
I'm going to be honest with you,
because I'm from Southampton. We're talking about a brewery from a far off land.
J-Mac, one of our resident listeners, Jonathan McCallendon, he's based in Harrogate, all right, when he's not off in other places. And basically, he's just said in the chat, he can back Roosters at 100%. Baby-Faced Assassin was one of those beers that I had when I tried it, and I went, I want to make this. And I don't like West Coast IPAs. I don't like super bitter beers. But the flavor overlay that you got from the Citra hops and the amount that they've put in really kind of just woke my taste buds up and went, do you know what? You can counter bitterness with a good punch of fruit, and it really will help. And even now, I occasionally ask my boss if she can bring me, 4 cans of Baby-Faced Assassin in, because it is a very, very nice beer. You should try it, boys, if you haven't already.
Yeah, sales sorted.
I've heard of it. I have heard of that beer, Baby-Faced Assassin, which is obviously like quite a unique name for a beer, right? But I've never tried it. But it sounds right up my street.
It's a banger.
The name comes from the fact it's about 6.5, but you drink it like a 4% beer, so it's a bit like Jaipur, those stronger beers that just glide down. So you can drink it by the pint, but
danger zone,
and things get a bit fuzzy quite quickly.
Yeah, it's a dangerous beer.
It is a brilliant beer. So, gentlemen, Matt has told us all about why he wrote this book. So I think it's time that we all chimed in and told Matt, and more importantly, our listeners, not that you're not important, Matt, but what do we actually think about modern British beer? And I mean, obviously, I know Roosters because my boss keeps bringing cans in, but you guys have all been up to Yorkshire in October of last year. What did you reckon to the state of modern British beer in Yorkshire and generally in the UK as a whole? Where do you think we're at?
There's like the kind of local pubs to me or the local brewery, should I say? I've got Arran Brewery, which is just across. and their blonde is a Cascade type, and it's served in cask, and that was always a long-standing sort of beer that I've been familiar with. Was probably the earliest sort of introduction, until obviously punk kind of probably came on the scene. But it just seems to be growing. We've got the Shilling Brewery in Glasgow, which is fantastic. We've obviously got Overtone, which is my absolute favourite. And it's just growing, which is good. And we're seeing a lot of different breweries popping up all over the shop. The whole camera, the great thing with the camera is it was the festivals. We get the Troon Beer Festival down here, and it's fantastic. You get to try loads and loads of different types of cask ale. And I think over time now, if I go into a pub and they've got cask on, I tend to actually go to cask. Probably, I don't know if it's the homebrewing thing or what, but I tend to enjoy the cask ales more because I know it should be fresher as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think there's never been a more exciting point to be in beer. I think it's just year on year beer. I would say probably in the last probably 7 or 8 years, it's just collectively got more and more exciting. But I think what's nice to see is that we've probably turned the corner of like super wacky beers. And now probably I've seen a bigger resurgence of respecting and perhaps even rethinking the original British beer recipes.
Right.
And I think maybe we've kind of realised we've probably outdone the whole let's replicate the American beer scene. And now we're realising that maybe there's some stuff to be done with our beer heritage, and actually like rethinking some of that and making that exciting. Not that old school kind of British beer isn't exciting, but actually it needs a bridge to those people that have kind of joined the kind of craft beer thing because it's been more Americanized. So yeah, I think there's an interesting path that British beer is going with, bridging our own heritage with the Americanism thing that we've kind of gone crazy for in the last, like, probably since Roosters introduced Cascade.
Well,
I
we had a new brewery that opened in Glasgow that was called Simple Things Fermentations, and it was all about not doing that sort of the American thing. It was about taking all these old styles and then bringing them kind of up to the modern day age and sort of methods and etc. Sorry, Tricky.
That's right. Yeah, I think you can see a bit of what Owen's talking about there in the kind of return to like lager brewing as well for a lot of craft breweries, where there seems to be this thing of coming full circle where sort of people abandon the mass produced kind of crap lager that we all still see in most of the pubs and stuff. Go through this variety of different beer styles, and then it seems like the breweries themselves and a lot of the people drinking those beers as well now kind of coming back to the things like classically brewed lagers and things like that. And similar to the way that you're seeing them brewing the traditional British styles, they're also going back to the more traditional kind of European styles and lagers and things
Czech,
like that.
German.
And that's quite interesting. Bedford is a interesting little sort of case study, I think, at the minute for what's going on a slightly more, I guess, provincial level beer wise in the UK at the moment as well. It's it's not the sort of level of what you would see in the bigger cities or whatever, but there is a sort of developing beer scene in Bedford, particularly craft beer scene. And then you've got the kind of relaunch of the Charles Wells Brewery as Brew Point recently, which has happened. And going there and speaking to the people at that brewery and sort of talking to them and hearing about how they're trying to sort of balance what they're trying to do in terms of the offerings of new beers versus also keeping their more traditional pub customers happy was quite an insight, because I think that's probably where there's still a bit of a transition to sort of happen, where you've still got a lot of pubs which are maybe not quite ready yet to take on, you know, these new brands and these new beers and things like that, even if it's coming from the brewery that actually owns those premises even. But they are, you know, obviously working really hard to try and target more of a craft market, but at the same time they're still having to supply and maintain a bit more of an old school offering in a lot of their premises, which was reflected by when they were talking to us about the sort of quantities of the beers they were brewing. Obviously, because they're running quite a big pub estate, a lot of the beer was still, for want of a better word, they're slightly less exciting you know, content that they're putting out, but it's definitely going in the right direction, and there's a lovely new you know, brewery tap room there as a result of that for me to go and enjoy.
That was the one you went to, yeah, that you did the video.
Well, I wasn't going to mention it, but yeah, there is a video for that.
Shameless.
Go watch it.
Yeah,
YouTube
you have
channel.
to understand here, Matt, that basically whatever we talk about, Tricky's got a video about it.
Brilliant.
I mean, that's just standard. You know, I should refer you to my video.
And if he doesn't, there'll be a video with
It'll go on the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
For next
That's,
week.
that's the way you work. So
Yeah, the ideas list.
I think we've basically covered within what we were talking about how it's developed in recent years, and I agree with everything that you guys have said. But I've also seen, especially around Yorkshire, from companies like North Brewing, Kirkstall, from Wild Child as well. Incidentally, you didn't put Wild Child in your book, Matt, and I was a bit hurt by that. But there's loads of breweries around Leeds, around Wakefield. Castleford's got a few as well, Pontefract, that kind of it. So basically West Yorkshire, there's quite a lot. There's a pretty good scene, and it is developing, and it has kind of, as the lads have said, moved away from the super mega milkshake, lassie, you know, sour IPA thing to more of the traditional styles, like a really good bitter or a brown ale or a golden ale or an English pale. And now we've got companies producing hops in the UK, things like Harlequin and all the other bits and bobs that Tricky's made random taster videos about that we've all had a bit of fun doing on the podcast. It has developed away from we want to be America, fuck yeah, to this is what we are. Let's embrace our heritage and move forward with what we've got, utilizing our own ingredients, so we're not sending all our money to Donald Trump. That's as I see it, anyway. So I'm going to ask Max.
Donald Trump's not president anymore.
Yeah,
I hope he's not watching.
Newsflash.
I don't give a shit if he is. I'll be honest.
He's a big fan.
Yeah, he's a huge fan. Big fan. Good people.
Amazing.
So what do you think, and I'm going to catch him mid-gulp, what do you think was the genesis of this changing beer style and ingredients within the UK? What do you think actually caused the change for companies like Roosters? Obviously, there was the we want to be America thing, and we've seen what the Yanks are doing. Let's see if we can do it over here. But what really was the change in beer style and ingredients in the UK, do you think?
You've got to talk about America when you talk about this, because if you look at what is called in America the craft beer revolution, they went from hardly any breweries. Home brewing was illegal until 1978 in the United States, and it was President Jimmy Carter that legalized that. And you have to remember that between 1920 and 1933, in a lot of America, drinking alcohol was also illegal. So they've had this, you know, and there's some states still have weird prohibition hangover laws. But what happened in America is this sort of land of the free entrepreneurial spirit mixed with all of these ingredients, mostly hops. And they were inspired in the US by traditional British brewing, German brewing, Czech brewing, that kind of thing. But they did what you said earlier. They made it their own. They Americanized it. And now there's almost 10,000 breweries in the US. But if you look at the late 90s, early noughties, that was starting to really build steam, and people were going to the US. And if you think about how you most people thought about American beer in 2002, you would think of Coors and Rolling Rock and that kind of tasteless but classic American lager. And people would go on a holiday to somewhere like California or Oregon or Colorado, where all these amazing breweries were popping up, and come back and go, wow, I've just had this IPA. It's blown my mind. And some of the early adopters of beer in the 90s and early 2000s started doing that and being inspired by this culture. But one brewery in particular came and tried to do that as fast and as hard as possible, and they're getting a lot of shit for it at the moment. And that's Brewdog. And love them or hate them, they got everyone talking about beer in a different way. Now, it's also worth mentioning Thornbridge Jaipur and Thornbridge Brewery, because Jaipur was kind of the first higher ABV beer that picked up steam. So although American hops were introduced in the UK in the early 90s, the beers that were being made were like Roosters Yankee, Oakham Citra. Well, that came when Citra came, but Oakham JHB would be a better answer to that. And a few beers that aren't around anymore, but they were still 4% golden cask pales.
Yeah,
Jaipur put that in a 6% beer, and people went nuts for it. And then Brewdog took that flavor and they tried to grow it as fast as they can, and that started another wave of new breweries chasing that. And they didn't look like a traditional British brewery. Their branding, think about Beavertown coming out with Skulls, but Wild Beer Co., Burning Sky, all these breweries opening, and they looked very different. And it was because not just the flavors of the American craft beer revolution beers, but the way that it had rebranded itself for a modern audience. And that just absolutely exploded. And you also have to look at America because of the ingredients. It's become the largest hop growing nation. Germany historically was the largest hop growing nation. I will say that Germany and the US between them grow 80% of the world's hops now. But Citra, which came along commercially in about 2009, 2010, that someone's going to definitely correct me on that, but Citra came along later, and that pushed that Cascade Centennial flavor to the next step. And Citra is a parent of Mosaic, and that you went from all this really bitter citrusy hops to tropical hops. Then New Zealand and Australia got in on the game, and they said, well, we've got hops that taste like tropical fruit and wine grapes. It was just, and brewers were like, we're going to try and get as many flavors into this as we can. We're going to make something totally different. And the UK went from a few hundred breweries to over 2,000 in 10 years. The market changed. But what's happened now is what happened in the US, that I think if you look at some of the breweries that are still independent but are quite big, so I'll say North, Daya, Siren, Verdant, Cloudwater, they are still making dippers, tippers, and fruited sours and doing stuff that is modern and flavorful. And if you think of modern craft beer, but Daya are making a best bitter. Cloudwater just did a cask red ale. North just released a core cask range. Look at the lagers that are coming out. Look at a brewery like Utopian, which is one of my favorite breweries, who are brewing German and Czech style lagers, but with 100% English malt, English hops, but using German brewing processes, decoction mashes, that kind of thing. But this is all part of in the UK, we're making it our own. I think that's what modern British beer is. It's less, yes, we're influenced by the US, and it definitely changed the beer scene here in the UK. But now we're like, well, how do we make it ours, and how do we take it forward? And I think that there's been a lot of, the pandemic has helped with this, a lot more looking inwardly at the challenges presented in the market, and what people actually want to drink. Now there's 2,000 breweries. Can beer consumers keep up with limited edition beers every week, or are they exhausted by it? I'm exhausted by it because I like to drink bitter and lager and West Coast IPA. Occasionally I'll drink something different, but I like to drink stuff that I know it's gonna I'm going to enjoy. And I think that's what's happening is that I think I might be getting ahead to the next question, but core ranges, that's what's happening. People want to reach for something familiar and comforting, because that's what part of drinking beer is about.
Well, Matt, to jump in on the end of that before Owen does, I'm sorry. If you want a good core range, mate, what you need to join me for a few pints in the Beaver and Ferret, which is literally the pub I'm sat in right now, because my core range is always on tap. There's always an IPL. There's always some sort of lager. I quite often have a pit. Yeah, some sort of Märzen.
Big fan of a Märzen.
You know, hey, what can you and me? But you see, I like this guy more and more every time he opens his mouth, right? But I was just about to say, what are the next big trends? And you've just said it. You said core ranges.
So that's one of them. But I've been thinking about this. Everything's cyclical in beer, and so people have been saying lager is going to happen for years, and we've seen that now in the last 2 years. You've got Don Zoko, New Barnes, Braybrook, Lost and Grounded. That's just a handful of brew. I mentioned Utopian. British lager has got really good. It's here, and there's even a mainstream one, Camden Hells. That is, if you drink that side by side with something like a Stella or a Budweiser, it's a very different beer. It's much drier. You can actually taste the Tettnang.
You mean it's a proper lager?
It's a lager. It's a German lager, German style lager.
So you've had that in Glasgow for a while with West breweries, kind of always, banging German lagers.
So I actually think, yes, we're going to see more core ranges. We're going to see more like bitters and cask beers. I think a lot of these breweries have expanded quite a lot and need to increase their turnover, and cask ale turns over quickly. But something I am starting to see is, 2012, 2013, I didn't know any brewer that wasn't trying to make a saison. They were like Belgian beer was for a little while, people were really into it. And I actually think I saw a few wit beers come out last year, and I thought something's happening here. Like Belgian wits, like the Queer Brewing wit, Burning Sky doing a seasonal wit beer. Unity did a wit beer, and I'm like, hang on, there's some Belgian wits. So I'm like, when's there going to be some Hefeweizens? And so, Cloudwater are doing a Hefeweizen. So I think there's a little bit of, people are going to miss some of the European classics. So maybe we'll get some Belgian triples and Saison Dupont style beers, doubles. I was in Bradford yesterday, and I was drinking a beer from Ienga. It was a Bock, so like a really dark, strong lager. And I was thinking, how many brewers will drink this and go, we need to make our own Bock. We need to lager it for 90 days. I think there's going to be, people are going to look to define themselves in a way that's a bit different from just bringing out dippers and tippers. And so they'll look to British tradition, but I think some European classics that maybe got pushed to the wayside. I mean, one of my favorite breweries is St. Mars of the Desert in Sheffield, and they just did a beer, a double release called Frogs and Mice. And Mice was a clone of Diranka XX Bitter, and Frogs was a clone of De Dollar Urbeer, both of which are two of my favorite Belgian beers. And I'm like, if British brewers are brewing these and then people are getting excited about them, then we're going to see more sort of German, Belgian, Czech recreations, or at least a very British take on them. And I'm all, more beers that taste like malt. I'm a big
for that shit.
I'm a malt fan. So I think that's it. We're going to, what is also important to know, when things change, what you like doesn't go away. You can get a great pint of bitter. Some styles fade and become more niche, but I think if people love something enough, it'll always be around in some shape or form.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of undercurrents and overcurrents, right? In terms of styles come and go, but the classics remain regardless, right? Well, you kind of hope they do.
Yeah, absolutely. If people keep buying them, then yes, they do.
See, that's the cool thing with the homebrewing side of things. We can basically whip up any style of beer as long as you can get the yeast. So in places like the Malt Miller and all that, just you can get loads of different yeast styles. So like you're saying, a Bock, I've got a Bock in there. I've got a Hefe, all these different styles. It doesn't need to be what's on the shelves commercially in a supermarket or a bottle shop sort of thing,
Yeah.
where you're kind of going super niche to try and find these.
And I think that's the perk of like when you get to the level of home brewing that the four of us are at, is we can literally make any beer you want to think about. Like, as Andy said, as long as you can get the yeast that you need. But for the most part, these days you can basically get like any yeast you want. Really,
Not necessarily make it well, but we can have an attempt at least.
We can have a go.
That's what it comes down to, isn't it? We can have a pop.
I mean, old Brooksy talking about his what's in his FV? It's his Omnipolo, Bianca, Blackberry, Blueberry, Mega, Crazy, Lacto, Sour IPA or whatever he's got going on. So I hope that works out for him.
I think there's a bit of a reflection of what we were talking about in terms of kind of core ranges and things like that with what people do with homebrewing sometimes, because you do kind of go off on a bit of a mad one initially, trying out all these different crazy things and wanting to throw everything at recipes and things. I think probably, you're always going to have an element of that, but I think a lot of us and probably a lot of other home brewers get to that point where you just then want to kind of go back to the classics, or at least go back to recipes and hone them and try and get those sort of house beers that you can rely on and fall back on. And Chris's like persistently bitter recipe that's on, I don't know how many times have you redone that brew, Chris? I think that's
I made it to version 7,
iteration 7 of persistently bitter. So maybe. And I guess that the home brewing scene has had quite a big influence on a lot of these breweries as well, because you tend to see the backstory for a hell of a lot of them is guy starts making beer in his garage and turns it into a business.
Hashtag Brewdog. Hashtag insert any craft beer.
Exactly.
Brewery.
I actually think the homebrewing scene is in rude health. Like, a good friend of mine is Johnny Garrett, who does the craft beer channel, and he talks to me about how that content he's doing is some of the most popular. And I guess a lot of people might have started homebrewing in lockdown as something to do. So I reckon there might be another wave of like new breweries, maybe, of people who go, maybe I will pack it all in and do that. What I will say to anyone considering that, do it for the love, because there's
ain't gonna make
not
money.
Not a lot of money in it.
You're not gonna be a millionaire.
That's the other thing they all say, isn't it? Yeah, don't do it because I'm basically working long hours for no cash.
Yeah. Expect 180-hour week.
Plenty of free beer though. But you can do that. You can do that without opening a brewery.
Exactly.
We do regularly. Right
so,
then.
I don't know. I just have one final point.
Sorry,
in terms of Matt talking about kind of the parallels with he's talking about the kind of American influence on modern British beer and the parallels of blues music through the late 60s and 70s in terms of blues having multiple influences across the US and then it coming across the UK, and then you having British blues and then that going back to the States to kind of influence their approach to music. So there's some interesting parallels there in terms of what's happening.
The amount of Americans that are going to be coming into the UK to drink cask. Cask is to hardcore American beer fans is like the gold standard of what they want to try, because in America you don't get sessionable 4% delicious beers. They are an abnormality, but more and more people want to get that. So I think you're going to see a lot of American brewers on research trips to Leeds, to Manchester, Newcastle, Bristol, maybe a bit of London, but maybe getting out into the UK a bit more and going, how do we nail these flavors at like 3.8%?
Yeah. So if you want to make a lot of money in brewing and you want to start a brewery, go and do it in America and make cask beer.
Yeah, I mean the great advantage that Americans have is they pay significantly less tax on their beer than we do, and as do Germans and Belgians and so on and so forth. So that makes it a little bit more profitable.
And German beer is better anyway. So yeah, let's move on. So right now we normally have a small thing that we do every single podcast when we when we've got something proper to talk about. We're not just drinking commercial beer, and that's called the commercial break. I think now is a really good time to get onto the commercial break, and I'm going to say the person who has spoken probably the least in this podcast, Mr. Andrew Lynch,
All right.
proud owner of whatever it is that your YouTube channel's called that I'm not even subscribed to.
As a ringing endorsement.
I am. I just can't remember what it's called. The High Road Brewery. I think Andy should go first. I think he should drink his commercial beer and he should let us know what it's all about. Yeah. Well, I've been absolutely jonesing for the last 10 minutes, so let's get it on.
Yeah, I'll go. So obviously, I'm a Overtone fanboy. But this one's different. So it's actually, I don't know if you guys seen, there was a lot of wet hops that had been frozen and brought over from the States. So this one it's using the Citra and the Zaka. And wet hopping was something I did myself as well because I've grown fuggles in the back garden and managed to harvest that and put wet hops in my stout that I did. So it's interesting to see that now they're starting to get access to wet hops just anywhere sort of thing because of the whole frozen sort of transit thing and the development of hops and that sort of thing. So yeah, I thought I'd pick that one tonight because it's quite interesting to see what the difference is. And it's got like there's more floral notes in it. It's Citra Zaka. It's definitely got that kind of more lighter sort of thing going on. But the Zaka is quite familiar from a previous beer I've done. I can definitely pick out. It's almost like a kind of pineapple-y sort of, but it's like a kind of mango-y pineapple-y thing. It's quite smooth. That's going on. So no, it's quite interesting. Definitely, this is obviously a hazy that we were talking about earlier, but yeah, it's very nice. Yeah,
that's it.
Short
That's
and sweet.
That's all we get.
That's all you get.
I missed it. What were you drinking?
So I had it's a wet hop Citra Zaka. That's
from where?
Overtone.
Overtone. Of course it's Overtone.
Of course it's
I don't even know why I bothered asking the question.
There's trends on this podcast, Matt. You'll pick them all up. Don't worry.
It's a great brewery, though, Overtone. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. That's why I put them in the book. It's nice to see Glasgow is a brilliant city, and home to one of my favourite pubs, the Ben Nevis in Finniston, which is great for a half and half.
Half and half.
You mentioned the half and half quite a lot, Matt.
I like whiskey and little half of beer, half a yarl,
wax,
and a little nip or something.
Hold on, half a pint of beer and half a pint of whiskey.
No, just a nip. It's called a half and half, but it's just a nip of whiskey. All
right, I could deal with that.
Yeah,
a nip.
So, what's your favourite whiskey, Matt?
I'm actually I love bourbon and I love American whiskey, but Scotch whiskey, I've got a few favourites. I love Islay whiskey, so I love Ardbeg and Lefroy and most things. I'm a big fan of the Macallan, but American.
So smooth,
but American whiskey is like I'm really into it, and it's really interesting. But just all whiskey really.
Any whiskey, it's good.
I think like I had something like a single cask Mortlach from Speyside not too long ago. It was a bottle I couldn't have afforded, but it just it blew my mind.
When you get to the more expensive whiskey, you get that kind of more oily content in it, sort of thing, and
it was cask strength, so it was like 57%. It hadn't been liquored back, but then we add our own little bit of water to it before we drink it. But it was like really like the oak character was just like huge tannins and vanilla, and it was mad.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Wow.
You got Andy on the subject of whiskey. He's
I've got
We need to move on quickly.
loads of whiskey over there. But yeah.
Andy needs to start doing his own fucking podcast on whiskey. Trickadelic, what are you drinking?
Well, I'm approaching this commercial break with some trepidation, to be honest, because the beer that I've got, Chris, you've drunk this one already and given a not entirely enthusiastic review of it.
Oh, come on.
So I've got a Brew by
Oh
Numbers
my God.
Farmhouse Ale. On paper, it sounds great. It sounds great on paper. Mixed fermentation farmhouse ale with peach and apricot. And the colour looked nice. I wasn't so sure about the big chewy chunks of yeast that were coming out the bottle when I poured it out.
I don't think they're chewy chunks of yeast. I think that's actually apricots, mate.
Is that actually the fruit?
I think that's bits of fruit. Not that you can tell when you drink it.
It looks nice enough. Nice carbonation on it. The smell is musty, kind of, yeah. Peach and apricot that's been trodden into the garden shed floor, I think would be the best way to describe that. It's not awful. It's not awful.
Fuck it is.
Well, the aroma, I've not tried the taste yet. Quite sour. It's a little bit vinegary.
Oh no.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a backup beer because of this.
There we go.
I don't think it's going to be long.
No, listen,
that
it's
one
good or bad. Good or bad.
You need-
Commercial
You
break.
need to finish it.
No,
I mean, you do get a bit of the
horse blanket.
a bit of the goat, a bit of the goat on this one. It's a bit vinegary goat with a hint of apricot and peach.
I think Richie Brooks put that beer quite effectively when he said, if you simply bottled it by running it through a random horse trough at your local horse stables, that's about where it ends up.
Well, it's not quite as bad as I thought it was going to be, which is about the best I can say for it, I think.
Is there a lot going on there, Tricky?
There's quite a bit going on there, yeah. It's yeah, I'm going to leave that one there. It's not brilliant. It's a bit
Shit.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so, it's a bit of there is a bit of a trend for people doing the sort of mixed fermentation and farmhouse styles. I think sometimes they just don't really work like this one. But I don't know. I mean, do Beer by Numbers do a lot of beers like this? I'm not sure that they do. Maybe this is something that's fairly new to them.
Isn't it Brew by Numbers?
Brew by Numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, practice makes perfect. That's what,
they need to keep fucking practicing then.
Yeah. Maybe practice first before you sell it.
I'll tell you what, Matt, if you really want to experience that beer, because Tricky's now had one, I don't need to send him a bottle. I have a spare. I'll happily put it in the post and send it over to you, mate.
I'm all right. I'm all right. I believe in the integrity of this podcast. And I will take your word for
That's
it.
Good, Matt. That's good. We might even invite you back.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll try and turn up.
Chris might put it in a cannon.
I'm going to try and fight my way through it for the sake of science.
Yeah, push back the foreskin of science, Tricky.
Sometimes you get life throws you a bad beer and you just have to bolt it down. That's what I say.
That's it.
Down in one. Down.
Yeah.
Hey, give yourself heartburn.
I will, Tricky, name your price if you down that beer.
No.
All right.
Yep, there we go.
There's too many chunks in it. It's not. I don't think it's downable.
So listen,
it's a choking hazard.
I'm drinking a beer that is straight off the hype train.
Here we go.
Oh, yes.
Rapping people.
It is.
Oh,
It had to be.
Verdant Putty. It arrived in the post today, and yeah, pretty exciting. First big release of the year. I decided FOMO is a big factor in modern British beer these days, and when Matt, you were talking about kind of the constant releases of different beers coming out. You know, they kind of, I think breweries like live off that kind of FOMO factor of craft beer drinkers. So this, I guess, is the fact that it comes out every year. I had it last year. It was super green last year. Not so green this year, but still a bit green. To be honest, on the nose, I am getting that, like what Verdant I think is a little well known for in their Big Dippers, which is that oniony thing. I'm getting quite a strong spring onion thing going on the nose. Yeah, really fresh garlic. The flavor though is super lemonade-y, so it's kind of Izaka, it's Izaka, Galaxy, and Mosaic. The Mosaic is probably kicking a lot of that oniony garlic thing, I would imagine. It's a thick beer. It's a double IPA. It is ultra hazy. It's like borderline yeast starter going on.
We got the last can that was canned.
Yeah, it's got it's not quite it's not yogurty, you know, like when some double IPAs or big New England IPAs are yogurty. It's not that. It is very hazy though, but it's weirdly like the mouthfeel is slick, but it is reasonably dry. It does bring you back. It's not cloying. It's not overly sweet. It's reasonably well balanced, but it is quite slick in the mouth, which is quite pleasant. But I wouldn't say the tropicality is coming across as well as it should in terms of this beer. I think it is still too green. You're just getting way too many vegetal,
So do you think it needs more time?
Yeah. I mean, I've got 2 cans. The other can's going to go away for like 3-4 weeks, and I'll drink it then. And I think it will be a totally different beer.
Yeah,
but it's just the fact that the podcast. I was like, you know, I've got to do this just because it's massively hot topic right now. It's the biggest probably talking point in British beer right now is Verdant Putty. I don't know. They failed to get it right on release at the moment.
Is it because they're not trying to rush it out? It's almost like they keep it in tanks over Christmas to give it the kind of conditioning time, but then it's almost like they still feel like they have to push it out quicker than normal because it sounds like it needs more conditioning time.
They've got a deadline, right? They've got a release date. They want to gun for it.
They should do what she did in America, Adele. They should say, look, it's not ready. We're going to give it another week.
Yeah. They should cry live on Instagram.
That's what they should do.
No, I feel bad. I shouldn't take the piss out of Adele. Half her cast got cut down by COVID. Like, I shouldn't take the piss out of it for crying. But I just thought it'd be funny if Verdant started crying on Instagram. But
no, it's
a good beer. I think it will be better in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah,
there's a lot of emotion in beer. You know, I think it's funny the hype for this. I'm aware of Putty that's out, but it's kind of passed me by because I like drinking draft beer. I like going out and drinking it on tap. So you know, you mentioned you've all got kids at home, which makes sense. But I just have my cat, which I can generally leave him at home and go for a beer, and he doesn't get too annoyed with me. So, but my favorite place to try new stuff is on tap. So my experience kind of revolves around what, you know, I'm not going to seek out Putty, but if I walked into a bar like Port Street Beer House or Heaton Hops near me and they've got it on, I'll definitely have a half. I'd be curious to see what it tastes like. But you're right. I reckon in 2 or 3 weeks in the fridge, it's going to become integrated. And, you know, I wrote an article last year about can shock, about how just the act of moving beers like this around, you've got so much like micro particulate that you destabilize when you put it from container to container that you lose that balance. And
I fucking love this guy. I love him. He's got science in what he's talking as well.
Can shock.
Dude, seriously, can you come on this podcast like every week?
I'd happily come. I couldn't do every week because I'd normally be in the pub right now. But I'd definitely come back again and talk
He's
about.
going to blow us off for a fresh pint. You heard this?
We appreciate the sacrifice, man.
Yeah. It's all research, though, Chris. It's all research.
Absolutely, I agree. And if I didn't have 2 kids, I'd be researching every night.
It's all tax deductible as well as a freelance beer writer.
Oh wow!
Oh,
I need one of
enough
them.
already.
Expenses. Hey,
Come on
that's
then,
it.
Matt. What you got in your glass, mate? Because it seems like Owen's got actual putty in his.
So I like to follow the hype train as well, and I'm drinking a beer called Morrisman by Elusive Brewing in Berkshire. I'm recently went to my first local camera meeting. I've only lived in Manchester for just over a year, but I went to my South Manchester and Stockport camera meeting, so I feel it was appropriate to have a beer in the fridge to mark the occasion. Not that Morris dancing is really associated with Manchester, and I also think that camera stereotypes should die. I'm writing an article about that at the moment. You'll be able to read that on Pellicle in the next month or two. But this is a double chocolate dry stout, 5%. So it's the base stout is nice and dry, but then it uses chocolate every stage of the brewing process according to the label, and then there's a bit of vanilla added as well, but it's not overbearing and sweet. It's really chocolatey, but it's super balanced. Like, it dries out really quickly in the finish. It doesn't have any sort of roasted coffee notes. It's definitely dark chocolate, cacao, just a little bit of vanilla. But just another super drinkable 5% beer from Elusive. And do you know what? It's nice to have this kind of flavor at 5%. Like, I've got some Imperial Stouts in the fridge. I've got a couple from Brew York. I've got some of the Cloudwater, my continuous improvement. And I sometimes reach into the fridge for one of these 440ml cans and just go, I don't think I want to drink a whole can of 13% like oil. I would love a little sip of it. If there's someone to share one with, that makes sense. But with a beer like this at 5%, I'm more than happy to drink a whole can. It slips down. It's nice and dry. More 5% stouts.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think, stouts have, I would say, more recently become synonymous with being like impies, really, right? You're not really seeing that many average
9%,
5% ABV stouts. But didn't Andy put out a double version of Morrisman not too long ago?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to try it, but apparently it was well received.
He just announced a double version of Oregon Trail today.
Ooh.
So there's some hype for you.
There's hype. I'm hyped.
A literal hype trail.
I'm very good, Chris. Very good.
Just have to try not to die of dysentery.
Or getting killed scalped by Red Indians, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, it's in Oregon, so you're going to be stoned off your tits anyway. It's not going to matter, is it?
Indeed, just floating on by.
Yeah, that's the one.
So are we done on the commercial break, or Chris has still got his to do?
I've had to abandon mine. I'm switching to the backup plan.
Oh, is it the track gold top? You dirty bitch.
It's Nelson and Raquel one. I won't talk about mine.
Yeah,
you fucking will, you twat. Right.
All right then.
So I've got Brew by Number 05, which is a India Pale Ale with Amarillo and Citra, and I can sum this up in one very simple way, which is it's not as good as my IPL. I get a small amount of pineapple and a little bit of peach, and fuck all else. So there we go. I don't really need to say much more about this. And I have to say, Brew by Numbers, if you are listening to the podcast, which I really doubt you are, step your game up, because the last batch of beers that I got from you have really not been great. All right.
Which one was that, Chris? That was so quick that I missed what the actual beer was.
To be fair, you're not missing much. It's 05, which is the India Pale Ale with Amarillo and Citra.
Yeah, no, I had that one last night as well. You're right,
and
it's shit.
It's shit. So I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to drink it because I'm tight and I'm from Yorkshire. But other than that, I would throw this at the cheese plant, which is going to become my new This is what I would do if I don't like a beer. Throw it at the cheese plant because I don't like the cheese plant, right? And it's literally just outside my shed. It's like I'm pointing. It's just there. The other side of that frigging wall is where the cheese plant is.
Where the hedgehogs have sex?
No, the hedgehogs have sex underneath the climbing frame. You know where the climbing frame is?
I do,
yeah. So the hedgehogs, I've got 2 hedgehogs that live underneath I've got to tell Matt this now. So I have 2 hedgehogs.
I need context here, yeah.
So
context is everything.
I have 2 hedgehogs that live underneath my shed. And if you go back to one of the early episodes, it was like 4 or 5 or something like that. I actually have to stop recording, take my headphones off, and shout "fuck off" to the hedgehogs because they were banging outside my door. And when hedgehogs are fucking, there's a lot of spines involved. So all I've got to say is it must be painful because the squealing was really off-putting.
Very, very dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something I've really considered before, but now I am. Thank you.
Yeah. And also, just to put this one into perspective as well, quite often you'll see me either put the gun at the roof and shoot it, or you'll see me bang on the roof. And that's because the grey squirrel family that live in the tree, which is just there, they fucking shag on my roof as well. Right? So I've got literally a menagerie of bestiality going off around me. I'm just glad that I've got doors that shut.
Chris is the only one that's not seeing any action in that shed.
Wait there.
Get him away.
No, he's got the wet wipes.
Oh, this is taking an unusual turn.
Yeah.
They're for cleaning my glasses. All right.
This is totally normal.
They are very clean.
Yeah, I rub them regularly. Come on, Tricky. What's this new beer like?
All right, so I'll be very quick, but this is Weight of the Planets by another Track beer. Like I said before, I'm a big fan of Track as well. So this one's Clayton Hops, which I assume is the New Zealand hop company that they've imported the Nelson and Rakau hops for. So it's one of their gold top dippers, which is the lactose kind of infused. So gold top as in like milk bottle. So kind of, I wouldn't call it, I mean, I guess it's kind of a milkshake dipper for want of a better description, but it's not quite that sweet. But it's just really thick, unctuous, loads of gooseberry. But the sweetness and the full body on it kind of makes the Nelson quite juicy, whereas sometimes it can be a little bit dry and grapey. And a little bit of that kind of limey sort of New Zealand hop thing going on, and it's just really good. I love the Gold Top series from Track. All the ones that I've had have been brilliant. So big thumbs up from me. Cheers.
I like Gold Top milk on my cornflakes.
That's also good. And a very nice contrast from the Farmhouse Ale, I must say.
Yeah, that's a big step up. I'm a big fan of the Gold Top
That's
stuff.
Opposite ends
like
of the
it, Matt?
spectrum.
So, I think Track makes some of the best hazies out there, but and I do enjoy the Gold Tops, but it's not my usual go-to. Sometimes the mood for a juicy beer will take me, and I'm very lucky that I can head to the tap room down the road and indulge myself. But they're impressive beers.
I want to move to Manchester.
That's the best beer scene in the UK, so I don't know why you wouldn't, to be honest.
Almost.
But like I say, I like to go for my West Coasts, but I will occasionally try the juicy beers. I tell you what, though, next because we've been talking about it, next time I do go there, I will have to have a Gold Top and just remind myself of them, because it's not something I go for often enough. They've got one thing they've got at the Track tap room are these Czech style lager taps, so they can give you a really foamy pint of their house lager,
like the side tap.
The side pour
things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the Arosa is their house Hellas lager, and it's absolutely beautiful. So I drink a lot of that when I go there.
Nice.
Boys, you know we're going to Arbor. I think we need to go to Manchester.
Well, I think like we're organising a few trips. Like we like to get together, Matt. So if we're up in Harrogate or up in Manchester, we'll give you a shout. Come join us.
Absolutely, I'd love that. I'd love to show you some hidden gems in Manchester. I mean, it's an amazing beer scene, but it's just I keep discovering new stuff here every day. It's got a great mix of like really modern bars and tap rooms, but also some like classic pubs with just ridiculously amazing cask. So, yeah, It's got it all.
Well, that sounds like an invite too good to.
I'm definitely up for hitting
ignore.
the track tap room as well, for sure.
I know that most of the boys from the beer barrel aged addict support group that we're all a member of, I do think that they're listening to this podcast. So, boys, looks like we're going to Manchester.
Yeah. Anyway, we've got a lot of questions to get through, and
Not a lot of time to
about
do it.
45 minutes to do that. So I'm gonna pitch in, Matt. There's a question for you. You clearly spend a lot of time visiting different breweries just as a result of your role and your job. What's your favorite brewery to visit?
So that's a really good question. And I'm going to pick a few different. I'm going to give you more than one answer because I think it'd be a bit biased to just pick one brewery. But
That's fair.
anyone who's followed my writing for a while knows that a lot of my personal journey in beer, I've loved beer for a long time. But my dad, who's from Lincoln, got a job in the US in this town called Fort Collins in Colorado, and he's been there since 2010. And he's now retired out there. You know, he met someone, and they're settled down. But he lives near this amazing brewery called Odell, which is kind of one of the legacy US craft breweries, founded in 1989 by Doug Odell. And their core IPA, it's just called Odell IPA. They have a few IPAs. They do a really great hazy now called Mountain Standard, which is like a mountain IPA, sort of like that East-West Coast hybrid. But their classic IPA is just before we called West Coast IPAs, we just used to call them American IPAs, and that's the best way to describe it. It's just this tangerine, orange peel, grapefruit, lots of like crystally malt, not crystal malt, but like it's that caramelized malt character. It's never sweet, but just gives the beer that roundness. But that tap room, that brewery, it really sort of sent my enthusiasm into overdrive. It was visiting there that got me into beer, and every time I visit, I'm reminded of that, and I still feel that way about it all these years on. And it's a really special brewery for me for that reason. Northern Colorado is just beer country. They are beer mad. Every town has like 20, 30 breweries. Denver, the big city there, has about 80 breweries. And you've got everything from breweries making Czech lagers to spontaneous beers to IPAs to stouts. There's just everything. There's hype breweries like Weldworks and Outer Range doing some of the best hazies you'll ever try. It's just beer country. So it's an amazing place to visit, but Odell is very special. But in the UK, I'm going to give a shout out to two breweries in particular that something that's important to me is, although I write about beer for a job, I still try and keep myself as an enthusiast first. Like, I am a beer fan. Like beer excites me. Beer is what I drink when I want to hang out with friends, when I want to relax. It's really important. And my favorite breweries are reflective of that. Even though I also have to think about beer objectively as a commentator and writer. But sometimes I like to take that hat off and just indulge myself and enjoy some breweries. So two that I love, firstly, down in Sussex, there's a brewery called Burning Sky. And they're in a village called Firle, which is near Lewis, which is where Harvey's Brewery, the family brewer, are based. And there's some really exciting breweries like Beak and Abyss are down there as now. So an amazing place to visit for beer. But Burning Sky were founded by a guy called Mark Tranter, who used to be the head brewer at Dark Star Brewery, now part of Asahi, because it was sold to Fuller's before Fuller's was sold to them. But he was there for 17 years, and he set up Burning Sky on his own in 2013, and now is a small team. And they do great West Coast IPAs and New England IPAs, and they do great cask beer, but they're also known for just some of the best barrel-aged, sort of Belgian-style, lambic-influenced beers. They do a spontaneous Coolship beer now, which is now a blend of 1, 2, and 3-year-old beer that they release every year. It's just called Coolship. My favorite of their range is called Saison Anniversaire, which is their house beer, Saison de la Provision. So Saison de la Provision, or Prov as they call it at the brewery, is a Belgian Saison which gets 3 months-ish in a foeder, But the Saison Anniversaire is that beer then aged in white wine barrels, like fresh white wine barrels for 9 months. So it has this really forward white grape flavor, but balanced with like oaky tannins. And it's just magical. It's one of the most wonderful things being made in the UK, and it just shows the potential for beer. It's a brewery I'd love to see open a little tap space. So people could, I mean, people do rock up at the brewery, but they don't have a tap room or anything. And I think that's the sort of missing piece in the puzzle for them. But yeah, Burning Sky, I love them. But the other brewery I want to mention is a bit newer in the UK, but and they do have a tap room, and it's their tap room that makes them so special. I mentioned them earlier, actually. They're in Sheffield. They're called St. Mars of the Desert, founded by Smod. I just love them. They're founded by a couple called Dan and Martha Paquette, and they were living in. So Martha's from Yorkshire, but Dan is from Massachusetts, and they had a brewery based out of Boston called Pretty Things, which was just a really hype brewery from about 2008 to 2015, and they were largely making like heritage English recipes, like Imperial Mild, Belgian-inspired beers. And what was interesting, after speaking to them, is around 2014, 2015, when they were winding down, like Treehouse, Trillium, people were going nuts for those beers. They saw that change happen in New England in real time. They got out of beer for a couple of years, relocated to Sheffield, and in end of 2018, early 2019, they established Smod in Attercliff, about a couple of miles north of Sheffield city centre. And they do actually do a house New England IPA called Clamp, which locals are absolutely obsessed with. Lots of lagers, lots of Belgian-inspired beers. What I love about Smod's beers is they all taste like Smod beers. They have a signature, like they don't taste like they're just doing what everyone else is doing. It's their own take on it. But the best way to experience that is to go to their tap room. It's not open until March, so don't try and go until the clocks go forward. I think that's when they're going to open the tap room again. But it's only open on Friday and Saturday, and it feels like you're in a Belgian beer cafe in the middle of this industrial estate. It's cozy and friendly. The beer is exciting, and you'll just have to tear yourself away. I was lucky enough to go a couple of times towards the end of last year, and now it's dead easy for me to get to Sheffield. So as soon as they reopen, I'm just gonna go there and sit in the tap room on my own and soak in that experience. And that's why I love what I do, because of breweries like Burning Sky and Smod. They're not the only ones, but they're just the examples that came to mind for me this evening.
Cool. Let's have a quick run around the room. Favorite brewery, Owen?
Favorite brewer, Christ. Sorry, I'm pretty on the spot there.
I know, that's why I did it.
Probably Daya.
Okay.
I'd say Daya is probably my favorite. Yeah.
Do we need to ask you, Andy?
No, you don't.
Okay.
No.
Tricky, what about yours?
I'll go with Track.
I thought you might. Yeah, I have to say that mine probably at the moment would have to be Track as well, because you guys don't know, but I got a delivery from Track earlier, and they got promoted from down in the shed beers to when I'm watching TV beers. That's how good they were. They're TV beers.
So Matt, Chris has different categorizations in his own household around kind of beers. It's complex. Don't ask about it.
Yeah, I'm a scientist. Everything's complex. But yeah, I really like Track. Some of the stuff they're putting out is brilliant. I also like Arbor, but a couple of Arbor's recent releases have been a little bit below par for me. Wild Child still knocking it out of the park. However, they're not quite on a par at the moment. And I blame Tricky for getting me into Track beers. It's his fault. He put a load of stuff up.
Track's amazing.
And I didn't realise that they were in Manchester, otherwise I never would have drunk it.
Oh dear, the Yorkshire bias.
It's a bitter pill to swallow, Chris.
It is, mate. It is.
Tough.
But this is the thing. I've discovered that I am able to open my mind and be more accepting, and not just be, if it ain't Yorkshire, it's shit. If it ain't Yorkshire, it's a couple of steps above shit. So, that's where we're at the moment.
That's
but
very generous of you, Chris.
No, to be fair, Track are blowing it out of the water. Their beers are fucking amazing. Now, I want to ask Matt a question, because I feel that Matt is very much on my level when it comes to beer. He likes good beer made well. Okay. Unlike some people that we could mention, like Richie Brooks, who's just said that we have to remember Banks Brewery in Wolverhampton. And I've gone, no, we don't. So I think one of the things that I want to ask is, do you think there's going to be any other evolution of styles, reinterpretations of classic styles? Is there any room for more styles? And more importantly, do you think that craft breweries within the UK are actually going to start bringing beers like the alt beer, the Märzen, and other German styles to the UK and start reinterpreting them in a way that are absolutely just kind of hugs the British style and embraces the way that we make beer?
So, multifaceted question. I'll give you a multifaceted answer. Absolutely, there's room for new styles, but all styles are rooted somewhere. So, if you think about, for me, if you think about New England IPA, that style comes from Hefeweizen. It might not taste like Hefeweizen in terms of like classic phenolic flavors like banana and clove, but in terms of having that sort of particulate in hazy experience that existed in a beer vernacular, it was just based on the ingredients that were available to those brewers and the yeasts that they were using. Brewers like John Kimmich at The Alchemist, who had access to Simcoe and Mosaic, had this yeast that wasn't flocculating, and that, you know, he invented Heady Topper, and everyone tried to copy it, and they tried to copy Main Dinner, and they tried to copy Lawson's Sip of Sunshine. Apparently, those beers got hazy because small breweries were basically trying to crop the yeast from cans of Heady Topper, which was weird because that's the laziest yeast in, you know, of that pitch.
Yeah.
So that's why you were getting this even less flocculent yeast when they did that. But that for me demonstrates that there's always going to be someone who riffs on an idea and makes it their own, and then if it sticks, then everyone will try and copy it. So it's hard to predict I don't know what that might look like. I think, but I do think in the UK, bitter is something that, and malt is about to have a big influencing period of time in beer. So something that's happening in the US is that there's this rise of this new type of maltster called a craft maltster. Traditionally, brewers would buy malt from a very big malt house, but what you're seeing now is people essentially setting up farms, growing malt, and trying different things. Like the actual malt grains, you can treat that like coffee. And anyone who's a little bit into coffee will understand that you can apply different heat treatment, different kilning and roasts to malts for different flavors. In terms of coffee, you can treat them with like water or lactic acid and ferment them and then roast them. So people are starting to do this with malt and get interesting, different malt flavors. So there's that innovation at one level, but also maltsters are now bringing back heritage varieties. So malt isn't just being produced for extract and color; it's being produced for what character it can do. So there's a couple of varieties that Crisp Malt in the UK have brought back. One of them is Hannah, which is based on the original Moravian barley that Pilsner Urquell would have been made from in 1842. And I've had a few beers with that, and it's outstanding, and it has this character to it. You can taste it in the beer. Chevalier is another. So this is the malt that would have been used to make the original IPAs back in the 19th century, and those are becoming accessible again, and that unlocks something for the brewer to work with recipes, either work with traditional recipes or put their own spin on it. So I think there's going to be a much more focus on that kind of brewing. And I think that something that's coming back is there is a desire for maltier beers, so amber beers, red beers, brown ales, and stouts. The tricky part is the pale sells. When you're on the bar, when you're in the bottle shop, it's the pale beers that are the bread and butter of a brewery, because as much as they want to innovate, they make something delicious, they also need to produce beer that sells well. Otherwise, they will go out of business and not be able to make any more beer at all. So I think there is a desire. You mentioned something like alt beer there. So when Mondo Brewing opened in London. So Mondo is a great London brewery based in Battersea. I think they deserve to be much bigger than they are. They have a great tap room down there, and they do really well with local sales, which is maybe why you don't see them on a bigger basis. They're very much rooted in that South London community. But when they launched, their first beer was an alt, because their owners were like, alt beer is the best beer. We just want to produce the best alt. And essentially an alt is very similar to a British bitter, but served on keg, because being a German beer. So that beer didn't sell. So this flagship beer they wanted to base the brewery on, they had to pull from the lineup, and now they make great IPAs. So there's definitely a desire for brewers to make these styles, but it's kind of up to us to get people excited about them and get ourselves excited about them. Like when we go to the bar, are we going to get that gold top dipper, which we're very excited about, or are we going to order the brown ale? Like what's, that's in, if more people go, do you know what, I am going to have the brown ale, then that's how that, are people going to buy 6 or 12 cans of the brown ale? Until that happens, you're not going to see permanence for this thing. But what I will say is that there is a definite sign that brewers are increasingly interested in British tradition. Daya are doing a bitter, Track are doing a bitter. You should see how popular Sonoma is. I mean, Sonoma is an American hot beer, but it's English. It's 3.8%, ultra pale. It's a very Northwest style, it's a Northwest style bitter. It just happens to be hopped with American hops. But that beer just flies out, and I think there's an immense future in sort of modern cask, and I hope that malt forward styles are part of that, but that'll only happen if we're buying them.
So I think the message there is, if we want new styles, we need to actually buy them.
Yeah, I mean, when you're making that beer purchase, are you buying 12 dippers, or are you going to say, I'm going to throw in the red ale? I'm going to give that one a go.
I think if you're Owen, you're buying 8 dippers.
And 12.
and
give me
tippers.
respect. Right. A dozen seems fair.
Half a dozen tippers.
I'm a
as well.
big Dipper fan.
There's nothing like dippers are brilliant, but I like a bit of variety. So, and I can say that because I'm drinking a stout. So.
No, I think actually, I think a lot of people tend to like mix it up a little bit, trying a little bit. Well, certainly for me, I like to try a little bit of different stuff. But I don't know. I think should we move on to another question?
I think the next question is one that I would really be interested in.
Go on.
Okay, I'll say it then. So,
Go on.
Which one are we at, though? We're jumping all over the place. So.
Which style of beer do you think has developed the most in modern British beer? Because I know which one I think, personally. But which one do you, as somebody who clearly has been around far more breweries than me, writes far more articles than me, and thinks far more deeply about beer than me, which style of beer do you think has developed the most in modern British beer?
Well, the obvious answer would be IPA, because that was a beer that's been around for a couple of centuries, and what we drink now tastes nothing like the IPA back then. But then if you think about it, I'm going to paraphrase the beer writer Mark Dredge, who once said that IPA is not the same as India Pale Ale. It's almost like they're two different things. So I'm going to flip this on its head. I'm not going to say IPA. I actually think that the style that's changed the most is British Bitter. British Bitter, as we know it, really has only really been around since the post-war era. It's existed, but it was post-war when that became a staple of the pub, where people would just drink 8 pints of the same beer all night. But if you consider bitter from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and what's happening now, and if I think about, I just mentioned Track Sonoma. I hope Track are listening, because they're basically sponsoring this podcast by this point. But
I wish they fucking were.
And I mentioned Daya with their Best Foot Forward bitter. I talked about Burning Sky. They do Plateau and Aurora, which are sort of golden pale ales on cask, but essentially that's their own version of a bitter. I think there is nothing more exciting and interesting for me than a cask bitter and the potential that as a blueprint. Because if you drink Black Sheep bitter, Black Sheep have only been around since the 90s. That they're not a particularly old brewery, but their beer is mineral and flinty and quite malt forward. And if you compare that to Mallinson's, I talk about this a lot in the book about a regional flavor to beer. Mallinson's has this West Yorkshire flavor, which is intensely hoppy, intensely bitter beer, again a low ABV. I think it's the most compelling style for me. Like since I moved north, I've been drinking so much more cask than I used to because it's very reliable up here. It's really well kept. It's got really high throughput. Lots of people drink it, which makes it much more reliable. You get far less duffers. And, as much as IPA is exciting, if you think about people going to the pub and just drinking that regular pint, and people want to drink 3, 4, 5% pints, that's what, because people like drinking pints. And if you drink pints of 7, 8% beer, your night ends a lot more quickly, or maybe in a way that's unintended when that happens.
Yeah.
So bitter, pale ale and bitter are very similar beers. That you're going to see a lot of brewers like look at cask ale and how do we embrace that. Cloudwater is a great example with their In Your Heart series, which is basically a revolving single hop cask beer. So they've done Galaxy in Your Heart and Azaka in Your Heart, and it's a hazy modern beer, but it's a cask beer. It's a bitter. It's just their riff on a very modern version of that. So IPA, yeah, you could easily say that. But like I said, I don't think IPA now is that related to the traditional IPA, whereas bitter is a true representation of tradition in Britain in terms of our beer culture. And that gives us much more authority to riff on it and do something different with it. And I think what's happening now is more and more people are coming around to that, how important something like a 4% cask beer is to our heritage. And that's why Track and North and Daya, who just did Can and Keg for so long, are now like, yeah, let's do lots of cask beer because people want to drink it. And I'm really excited by that.
Okay. I would lean heavily towards IPA, but I can see where you're coming from with bitters. Let's quickly run around the room. Andy, what do you think realistically has been the beer style that's developed most as far as what you drink and what you actually go with?
It's a pale for me, That's kind of what's it's having that kind of solid pale that's super drinkable, sessionable, that we're talking about the bitter, because the bitter and the pale are probably quite similar in that sense of session, that you can session on them. It's probably that's what it is for me, to be honest.
I see what you're saying. So like pale ales used to be very Fuggles, First Gold, EKG, that kind of woody, earthy kind of flavor, and nowadays they're more like a mini IPA. They're more well hopped, fruity, that kind of thing. Obviously, thanks to all the beer breweries that we've been talking about. I see what you're saying with that, definitely.
Yeah, that's the one that's the kind of staple that is the session ale. So yeah.
And weirdly enough, I brewed one about 2 weeks ago. Oh my God, wait there. We've got rainbow puke all over Matt's face. There we go.
Oh no.
He's back. He's looking great again. Yeah.
Sorry, you have to fill me in. What's the rainbow puke?
Okay,
so they just sort of res out for a second.
Yeah.
One of the weird things about using OBS Ninja like we do is there you go, it's gone again. But I can fix it with one click. You basically end up going all pixelated and kind of orange and blue. It's very weird. So I've been keeping an eye on that through the whole podcast. So you're looking great on YouTube.
It looks like you've just had like a night in the MP Stouts and you've just projectile vomited like Nintendo out the camera. Yeah,
that's pretty much it.
Like
pretty much it. Tricky, come on then. What do you think's evolved the most?
I'm kind of just going to chime in with what these guys have said. I think there's this sort of overlap between your kind of session bitters and your session pale ales, and again, like still riding on the track train or the train track. Sonoma is that sort of that classic example for me where you're kind of American pale ale meets bitter meats, because you can have it on cask, you can have it in can, you can have it. I assume they do it on keg as well. And it's that kind of like crossover session pale ale / bitter / session IPA thing where it's kind of a bit of a meeting of the two or three styles, I suppose. So yeah, along the same sort of lines, I guess.
Owen?
Yeah, I probably don't have a massive amount to add. I guess the obvious choices are like the pale ale bitter kind of, those kind of interlink, but the IPA obviously has come a long way.
A very long way.
Like, paradigm shifts really in terms of our interpretation of what IPA means now to where it was in our historical, heritage. But there you go.
Just trying to interject a little conversation on this one, because I'll be honest with you, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had on this point. Do you not feel that the evolution that's occurred with the IPA, with the New England IPA, the black IPA, the pale ale basically becoming an IPA, as far as the Americanized styling of it goes, do you not feel that the evolution that's occurred amongst those beers is kind of reminiscent of the difference between Neanderthal man and sort of Homo erectus? As in, it's almost become a completely separate species. It's become a completely different style.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like who in this? There's very few breweries brewing English IPAs now.
Very few.
So therefore, actually, the English IPA is a dwindling style in comparison to what we interpret as IPA, which is actually really an American IPA, or subsectors of an American IPA, whether that be West Coast, New England IPA, to some extent.
Is that a bit of a death knell for
a session IPA
for the English IPA, because people now expect something completely different with anything that is labelled as an IPA?
Yeah,
which seems like a bit of a shame.
If I can butt in, there's a brewery quite local to me called Red Willow in Macclesfield, who make brilliant beer. But they with the Chevalier malt I mentioned earlier, they did an English IPA, and it was absolutely cracking. Sort of 7%-ish, but just malty, but had all that sort of almost sort of strawberry, lemon zest, hedgerow kind of fruit. Beautiful beer, great out of can, but even better on cask. That kind of style just sort of lends itself to that sort of gentle carbonation, and it's a bit like, is Jaipur's American hop, but is it an English IPA? Is it a modern English IPA? I think, it was based on a West Coast IPA originally, but I think now that is a quintessential English IPA as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, we've made it, we've owned it. It's now English.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've done to the Yanks what they did to us.
And it'll just happen like that, cyclically. Between the two nations, we've got like half the breweries in the world. So
yeah,
it'll keep happening,
motherfucker. Right. The only other style that I would throw in there, and obviously the guys know I'm going to throw this style in, but I think that the lager genuinely has gone through quite an evolution. Maybe not as prevalent, maybe not as obvious as the bitter and the IPA, but you've got companies like Luke Stevens, one of our regular listeners and a good friend of the podcast. He's constantly banging on about what's the name of that brewery that he talked that begins with a B? You've mentioned it, Braybrook. They're doing some wonderful things. There's other breweries who are putting out lagers which are well hopped or hopped differently or a slightly different style. Lagers themselves have come a long way from Pilsner Urquell. I mean, the lager I was drinking at the start, which technically Tricky's going to say isn't a lager because he's a quite hater. But the the way in which I produce my lagers is very different, but I still produce the traditional Märzen. I still produce a traditional Helles, a Kolsch, which technically isn't a lager. But all of these different styles that I produce, yes, they're all lagered, they're all lagers, but are they actually true to the original style? And I don't think they are. I think they've evolved as well. Maybe not as much, but I do think that there's been evolution across pretty much every style, with the exception of the mild, which nobody really cares about.
Mild is going to have a good year. I
Come on.
I can
Come on,
feel
Matt.
it I can feel it bubbling. I think people are getting less cynical about camera, and like mild in May is going to happen. I'm gonna throw myself in both feet first. I'm gonna be getting out there. Something that's interesting, if you read a lot of history about mild, though, is that mild didn't always used to be dark. Like when we talk about mild, I mean, there is a great example of a modern dark mild, Boxcar in London. They do an outstanding dark mild.
Yes, they do.
You know, and I think that will lead a little bit of change in that regard. But mild used to be a pale beer, according to the beer historians like Ron Pattinson and Martin Cornell. So I think mild is, like other styles, open to interpretation. Maybe mild will veer towards being more pale again, but it's a malt forward beer. So yeah,
Yeah.
this year there's definitely going to be a good amount of milds kicking around. I think there's going to be a bit of buzz around it.
I hope so, because I think actually there's a lot that, especially through the summer months, I think there's a stage for very sessionable beers, and I think the mild actually presents like a really solid, malty, ever so slightly dry, enjoyable sessionable beer. But as my understanding was, the mild traditionally was always the second runnings of a bigger beer.
That not always, but if brewers are party guiling,
Yeah.
This is how Fuller's used to brew. They used to make. So I think when they brewed like 1845, they would party guile it, and the second runnings would become something like Chiswick Bitter or something like that.
Yeah.
It might not be that specific beer, but something similar.
Yep.
So I just wanted to revisit something that we briefly touched upon. It kind of ties in with one of the questions on the list, which is kind of the what people's thoughts are on the kind of the big brewery, the big multinational breweries kind of buying out, these craft sort of brands and stuff. And we mentioned like Camden Town and
Beavertown
and a couple of others earlier. And I think in some cases, you look at Camden Town, you look at the way that now Camden Hell's is or Hell is widely available, and that's great that you can have such a really good quality lager like that. You can go and buy sort of all over the place, and that would, I guess, kind of be one of the positives from things like that. And for me personally, on the flip side of that, you then look at maybe examples like Magic Rock and Four Pure, who for me sort of, after being taken over, sort of almost just sort of disappear out of the limelight, in a sense, in terms of producing stuff that people are getting excited about, and are maybe just then shifted into this sort of a supermarket kind of shelf filling role, which is kind of not what people were getting excited about them for initially. So yeah, I guess that's a sort of open-ended one to throw out there for Matt and everyone else to sort of talk about, in terms of what you think about the pros and cons of that process of brands getting bought out.
I think we're at there's been a lot of interesting news over the last 2 or 3 weeks about this. I don't know if you saw that Lion are the company who bought Four Pure in 2018 and Magic Rock in 2019.
Yeah.
This week announced that the brands have not performed. So they still own them now, but they have officially announced that they are for sale, and they could go to anyone. I don't want to speculate now what might happen to them, but I've been pretty honest that I think Four Pure, they rebranded. It has no hold in the beer geek community, because there's plenty of other independent brands that are far more appealing. And not really the commercial edge to cut through against Beavertown and Camden Town. There isn't a lot of room out there. And you also have to think in terms of Beavertown. Heineken have a company called Star Pubs, and they own about 3,000 pubs in the UK. So they can just funnel brands like Beavertown through their own channels. AB InBev, who own, they're the largest brewer in the world. They own Camden Town. But Magic Rock and Four Pure are not the only acquisitions that haven't done well. Hop Stuff was a brewery that was acquired by Molson Coors, who thought it might be a good craft brand for them, and they've sold all their space to Salt Brewery, who now have some nice London tap rooms. And London Fields was a joint takeover by Carlsberg and Brooklyn Brewery, who are separate. They're not commercially involved other than in a few small projects. But Carlsberg they merged with Marsden's. So Carlsberg and Marsden's are now one company. And obviously London Fields was a loss-making endeavor in a London tap room, and people gravitate towards the independents for that authenticity is a really important thing. But we're also seeing something new in buyouts in the US. A big company called Kanaki, which is basically Oscar Blues, Cigar City, and 4 lesser-known American breweries. They were acquired this week by Monster Energy, which itself is 20% owned by Coca-Cola. So you're going to see it's not just how many bile glands that you have to squeeze for the taurine. And I know it's all synthetic now, but like the original Red Bull was made from like the bile gland of a cow, wasn't it?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, you can still buy that in when you go to like Thailand and places. Original Red Bull, can't you?
Yes.
A Thai
bucket.
I don't recommend it.
If you've never drunk a Thai bucket, you haven't lived.
Well, next day I thought I was going to die, but
yes, yeah.
But peaks and troughs,
flying without wings, literally.
But so you're going to see, like, I think there are going to be more people move in to try and buy brands. There's always rumors about such and such as selling. There's a lot of breweries in the UK that are actually owned by, and it's not that public, owned by private equity companies. And the Brewdog are an example. They're 20% owned by a San Francisco private equity company called TSG Consumer Partners, who are one day going to want return on that investment, which will involve either stock market flotation or selling to someone else. That money has to come from somewhere, and there's a few other UK breweries that haven't really disclosed. They're growing. They've got investment coming in, private investment, and those investors will want. Well, yeah, they've been quite transparent. Like they've talked about having private equity, but those investors will want return on that investment. So that has driven a lot of growth. I do think we're at that sort of chance to grow big. The opportunities there are running out. I think stability is something that needs investing in now rather than growth. They're just. I think it's too risky as well because the cost of making beer has just gone up dramatically from ingredients to, keeping the lights on in a brewery, the amount of energy and like gas, electric, water that a brewery needs, and the cost that cost has gone up 200% basically.
Yeah.
So the room to expand is shrinking. There's definitely going to be people, perhaps unexpected people, Kraft with a K is a big food and beverage company that might invest in a brewery. Red Bull, they've got money sitting around. Would they invest in a craft brewery? Absolutely. I think they will. Having space to brew alcoholic product. It's also being able to get access to resources like water. This is all what people are thinking of in terms of not just in terms of profit, but in terms of resources. So it's definitely in like a flux period where the boom of beer is definitely plateaued, and there's going to be some curveballs. I think Monster buying Oscar Blues is one of those. It's not unexpected, but it does feel weird to have a soft drinks company now owns 6 breweries in the US and is now essentially an alcohol producer. But the Brewers Association, the trade association, say, oh yeah, well they're not a beverage alcohol company, so we still class them as small and independent, which is utterly bizarre to me. But how long have you got? We'd have to do another podcast on that subject.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
We got
that was a
plenty
bit of a
time.
can of worms. That
There's
one.
probably
So-
a risk. There's a risk that we are at a juncture where malt prices are increasing, hop prices are increasing, energy prices, as you pointed out, Matt, have gone up like 200% in the last 6 months. Is there a risk that we're just going to see the craft brewery piece just get hoovered up by
No,
big money?
No, I don't think
companies?
so. I think one thing you have to remember is that actually, we actually do have a healthy, exciting, more vibrant craft. You mentioned earlier, we have a more vibrant craft beer market than ever before. Like, what an exciting time to be a beer drinker. The choice, the quality, generally speaking, is exceptional. I think we need to be mindful that it is still quite niche. Like, maybe not as many people are into it as we think or we hope, but every day someone will have a craft beer, for want of a better word, and experience flavors of citrus or tropical fruit and go, wow, I want to drink more things like this. That literally happens every day. Like, kids are turning 18 every day, and when they go into a pub now, Beavertown beers are on the bar, and they might drink that and go, this is interesting. This is not what I expected my first beer to taste like. This is something I want to explore. And then they discover Dare or Track or Verdant, and maybe Burning Sky or Braybrook. That there's, beer's kind of like a choose your own adventure. Like, there's so many styles and flavors. Like, something I hope, we talked about all these styles earlier. Those questions say to me that there is a desire for a bit more diversity in terms of beer styles available on the bar. As long as there's some good IPAs to keep us excited, we want to keep drinking those. But yeah, throw in a red ale, throw in an alt beer, throw in a Murtzen, give us something a bit different from time to time, because we love those beers too. I think despite a lot of pressure, and there will be closures, I think some people won't be able to ride out the pandemic and Brexit and all of the pressures that are on the market. But I also think there'll still be, in the last few years, who's open? New Barnes, Beak, there's exciting breweries still coming. Keep an eye on Futtle in Scotland. That's a really exciting beer, making like foraged saisons based in
Fucking down for
the
that.
Nook of Fife. So there's exciting new breweries emerging and potential. I've got to stay excited and optimistic, because it's my job. If there wasn't exciting beer to tell people about, I'd have run out of stuff to write about. So yes, there's always challenges, but I'm also excited about the good stuff.
Amazing.
I think that is a really good place for us to say goodbye to Matt, because his missus is clearly home. We've hit the 10 o'clock cutoff.
It's hard to stop.
And I think Matt needs to go and give his missus a hug and
make her a cup of tea.
I have
Yeah.
just been on a podcast with 4 blokes who are absolute nutters. And I hope you've enjoyed your time with us, Matt. I've got to be honest.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for having me on, especially after literally not turning up the last time I was supposed to be on. I would love
man.
That sounds about right.
Well, look, you made up for it, man. You made up.
Thank
for
you. It's been a real pleasure, folks. I'd love to come back on again in the future if you'll have me.
We will.
And thanks
Definitely.
to everyone watching on YouTube as well.
Yeah,
We'd
you've made
happily
some
have you,
friends on YouTube, I have to say. There's some guys, I'm reading the chat, and there's some guys on YouTube and a private group that we're a member of. Luke Stevens, Mr. Braybrook and Sour and Goatee Beer. He said if you do an audible version of your book, he'd buy it.
Well, I'll have to speak to the publisher. Can I just do a shout out to where people can find me on the internet?
Yeah, of course
Is that
you
all
can.
right?
Go ahead,
So follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Total Curtis. Curtis is my surname. Total. Do you remember like magazines like Total Amiga? Maybe I'm showing my age there.
A little bit.
Total Curtis. And I run a magazine called Pellicle that I'd love you to read. It's at Pellicle Mag on Twitter and Instagram, pelliclemag.com. We publish 1 or 2 articles a week. I run it with my friend Johnny, who is an amazing brewer, but also a great person to make a magazine with, and the amazing Lily Waite and Katie Mather, who help us edit and publish the articles. So give Pellicle a read. That's like my passion to get that magazine out, and I hope you enjoy the magazine and podcast. So thanks for reading that.
No, I thought it was a great book as well. I'll just come in and say
Oh yeah,
that.
and buy my book.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't seen, I'm actually going to pop something up right now, okay? For the YouTubers only, here is a picture of the front. Or if you guys are actually looking at YouTube, you're going to see this. I've got well fancy with OBS. That's what the front of Matt's book looks like. That is actually the episode of the podcast on pelliclemag.com where Matt's talking about Modern British Beer, his book. I've listened to it, and it's a very interesting listen to hear somebody talk so passionately about a beer that he's actually... Oh, damn it. What have I done? That's wrong. We're back. So what we've actually got is somebody who's very, very passionate about the topic that he writes about, and it definitely comes through. And thank you for coming on. And Owen, mate, top job, double thumbs up for lining up this guest for us, because you did a cracking job, mate.
It was pure luck, absolute, pure.
This is where you're supposed to say, I
soldier of
totally planned it.
Saw Matt, thought, you know what, this guy looks interesting. I reckon he might be up for a podcast.
I'm actually impressed with the hair, I'll be honest.
It's just all over the place.
I don't want to know where the hair is on your body, mate. I'll be honest.
Well, let's thank Jimmy from Unity, because he got me down there to do a book event at the tap room, which is how I met Owen. So thank you, Jimmy, and Unity, another brewery that are absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, respect to Jimmy.
Okay.
Nice one. Cool.
And Tricky and Andy, this is the least you've ever said on an episode ever.
Just listening, it's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, Matt's a super incredibly interesting guy to listen to.
Yep.
He has basically more knowledge about beer than all of us and probably everyone listening put together. So it's been super interesting to listen to him talk about.
You've not tried my homebrew, clearly. So.
Well, I mean, like, we may be able to make better beer at home, Matt, but you know a shitload more about beer than we do. So.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to shoot off now, cheers, and see you again soon, hopefully.
Take care of yourself, Matt.
Yeah,
Cheers, soon, buddy.
Nice one. Cheers, Matt.
Bye.
Nice one.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.
There we go. So, Audacity's still running, I hope, for all you guys.
It
I
is.
really enjoyed that. I thought the guy was very knowledgeable.
Oh, Matt is
absolutely.
a legend.
Right.
Absolute legend.
Let's cut the Audacity feed right there. I'll get Matt's over and Tricky can do this one. Yeah, there you go. So it'll be out sometime around about June. And there we go. Thanks very much for listening to episode 38. We hope you guys have enjoyed it. We're going to try and line up some more people. But other than that, I think we need to open the room for our standard after party. So I'm going to post the links into the YouTube
have we
stream.
stopped recording already, or is that?
Yeah.
We
should
can
we
stop
say-
recording now. Okay, let's stop recording on Audacity right now. Take care, guys, and see you later. Love
Yeah,
you all.
See you later, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Done. Excellent. Right, remember to save that one and stick it up on the shared drive.
Episode 38.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Pick my nose live on YouTube.
As you should.
Yummy.
Oscar was picking his nose and fucking eating it earlier on.
Yeah,
Yum.
my son does that. It's great.
Minger. Absolute minger.
Thomas just keeps a collection of it on the wall next to his bed.
Oh, yums.
Top
Yeah, so I'm
lad.
going to chip those off.
Right, so guys, that is the link for the Video Ninja Room, and the password is
I used to do that.
Yeah, to be fair, I think I pretty much had a.
there's the password. So it is whatever the link is, and the password is the Hop Edition 2019 --
Oh, man.
Jump
So
in.
good.
Let's have a bit of a chat for a few minutes. As it is, I'm going to end the stream. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you all soon.
Bye-bye, YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.